Welcome to Brain Cage, where we discuss BDSM, hypnosis, and the mind for all those exploring their fetishes and interests.
This is Puppet Master, your mentor for the podcast.
And this is Dracoso, your hypnotic guide.
Hi, and today's topic is intimacy. It is something we're all very passionate about. And this time around, we have a guest. Very knowledgeable person who goes by GleefulAbandon. Gleeful, would you like to tell us about yourself?
Sure, thanks for having me. Yes, I go by GleefulAbandon, she, her pronouns. I am a hypnosis fetishist, submissive, other kinds of submissive, not only in the realm of hypnosis. I have been involved in the in-person hypno-kink scene since the end of 2012, and I teach and I write and I work with others to create educational hypnosis content.
Yeah, and I first saw you teach a class on the history of hypnosis, which was so fantastic. If anyone gets a chance to, I really recommend going to that because it's so interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a wild topic.
Yeah. I want you to write a book on it. I would read that.
Well, welcome. It's wonderful to have you, especially on this podcast. I know this area that you've had a lot of knowledge, a lot of exploration yourself, and we love to share these types of topics with individuals, especially with this one. Where do you think, if someone is getting in and trying to understand a bit more about the topic of intimacy, where do you think the best place to start might be, Gleeful?
The best place to start is with you and your partner. I mean, if we're talking about intimacy, this could be about pre-existing intimacy between partners who are looking to introduce hypnosis into their relationship, or you're meeting someone in the context of hypnosis and you're, trying to figure out what the intimacy is there. But the place to start is you're not going to read a book that's going to tell you how to be more intimate with your partner. There's certainly reading you can do about enhancing relationships, but ultimately this is about the people involved, and that's the magic of it, really.
And even people who haven't been in relationships, if you've had a close friend, I mean, I'm sure that you've had intimate moments with them as a friend. So if you think about what made those moments intimate, I think that'll help you relate to everything else we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I should hope that everybody, regardless of your romantic or sexual history, has some sense of what intimacy means to them.
Well, yes, it's good to have a bit of experience to refer back to, and each relationship, I think as you were saying, Gleeful, that there is no book that will outline it. Each relationship's very unique. It's something that is explored, and each person may have a different understanding of what they're bringing with them and who they're going to interact with. And so trying to get a one-size-fits-all sort of cookie cutter isn't really what you'd want to look for when you're trying to explore intimacy. It's more about trying to make that connection with the person that you're with, so that as you explore and really get into some of those deeper points and some of the sexier fun you can have with it, it becomes something that's not only very enjoyable, it's something that you feel comfortable and safe with, which can enhance just how close and connected you feel with the person that you're with.
Sure, yeah, it should be recursive.
Yeah. And before I actually started thinking about this topic for the podcast, I didn't realize that reviewing the intimate moments was something I did myself, but it's actually something that I do after a session when I have a debriefing with a partner. Even the questions as simple as were the parts that you particularly liked. Those answers directly will tell you the parts that they found most intimate most of the time. The things that connected with them the most.
Yeah, and for each person, they may find something that will build the experience. For some people, it may have a heavier focus, and I think that either way, if you're working with emotional, physical, just straight up sexual, I think there are aspects of each, but some people may look for more of one rather than the other. But it may really depend on who it is you're exploring with or what you may be interested in or comfortable with.
Sure.
And so the main thing I love when it comes to what I look for when it's an intimacy is I enjoy feeling like the person I'm exploring with is having a very genuine experience. I'm something of a caretaker individual, and I look for making sure that the person I'm exploring with is also enjoying and is engaged and somewhat immersed in the experience. And I find that when they can be completely connected with the experience, I can let myself become a part of it. And so part of my focus, and for some people, especially if I'm just getting to know them, it seems very odd how focused I can be on the other individual. And so for me, understanding not only how I can connect with others, but also how I present my interests and my desire for intimacy, and just spending time to understand what people may be comfortable with from the start is another way to, I guess you could say, measure whether or not your form of intimacy may connect with them or may just need to communicate in a different form.
Yeah, but also what you're talking about is not being an asshole. And it's like, yes, not being an asshole and being a considerate partner is a prerequisite to being able to have a comfortably intimate relationship.
Yeah.
This is more, when I'm talking about exploring intimacy, I'm talking about what is the thing that we're exploring together that we didn't know was going to light us both up inside, or what is this fantasy that you had that I'm going to give a try that makes us feel like we accomplished something together. The intimacy isn't like, I understand what you have to give. Intimacy is something you create together.
Exploring each other.
Yeah. Exploring each other's minds, exploring each other's bodies, being open and connected. And you're right, it does start with not being selfish and self-focused. It's being aware of how to communicate in a very powerful way, and then to delve in and actually create very intimate moments through experiences that you can share and enjoy. So, Gleeful, what is, say, an example of something that you would find that give an idea of intimacy that you've enjoyed in the past, if you're comfortable sharing?
I'm comfortable sharing. So the question is, when do I experience intimacy?
Or what's an example of a time that you've experienced it?
So intimacy is the ongoing basis of connections with my partners. It's not, anytime I go into trance, for, in particular, my owner, it is extremely intimate because of not just the fact that I find hypnosis inherently intimate because I'm a fetishist, but because of the context of the many, many years of our relationship coming to the fore. So every time we do even a very simple induction, we understand, we have a sort of relationship grammar and shared language, and it's all of that coming to the fore. So it's happening every time I do hypnosis because it is building upon our history of hypnosis together before this point.
So rephrasing the question in a way that attaches itself to something you said before, exploration of one another really is key to creating new and interesting intimate moments.
I would say so, yes, and I'm certainly cribbing stuff from my partners. We talk about this all the time, and speaking of intimacy, it can be sort of hard to know who has what piece of these ideas, and they all kind of come together.
It's interesting because when I'm trying to create up a new scenario, usually hypnotic and kinky, for my partner, I'll think about the things that'll really touch on what they enjoy the most, and those things will be the intimate parts if I get it right. And I think the most interesting times in an intellectual level, I guess, for me, because I do like to figure out a partner, can be during the earlier days when I'm noticing, oh, they seem to react this way when I use these words as opposed to these words, and just getting it right as a top, as a test, as their dom, can create these amazing moments that are some of the highlights of the relationship.
Yeah.
And how does that reciprocate?
The partners that I've got on with well have always wanted to please me just as much as I've wanted to give them the best experiences. And we're learning each other as we go along. And that happens even when it's like not kinky. But I think the BDSM community has the advantage where we negotiate things a lot more so that we can tap into what the other person enjoys and create better, more intense, more intimate experiences with each other. Where in vanilla life, they tend to pad around the topic and avoid it and stumble upon the things that creates intimacy for them. And I can't see myself going back to that anytime soon.
I'd say especially with exploring and getting to know people, it can take more or it can take less time depending on who you connect with. And it sounds like, especially with building Puppet, you've found a lot more connection as you've gone along, and you've built that into an intimacy where you're able to see and feel like what they're gaining out of it. It builds and it grows over time. I know with some relationships you may not see as much intimacy come out at the start, and for some there may be a point where you've, I could say, reached a max, but you can reach a point where the intimacy may not be as fulfilling in some degrees. And so making sure that you are focused on not only receiving and being aware of what they're trying to experience, such as for myself, when I was much younger, I had a lot more difficulty understanding another person's desires and needs. I used to struggle quite a bit. And I think one of the main things I learned especially was sitting down and partially incorporating it into how I thought and how I wanted to apply it. For example, I had one person who very much wanted to be held during it, and I was very sexually focused when I was younger. And I found that just by taking that in and creating experiences where they're being held while we're doing things, even just spending time before any type of scene or playtime, I found that it can build that intimacy just by creating an idea from what they already imagine.
And then by building up the intimate moments, even in a non-play way, you found that transferred over to when you played.
Yeah. I mean, even in the after, I know there's a lot of people who I've talked with who they've found, even when they do intense, powerful scenes, if they end it and in the aftermath, they just hold each other. They just talk. They just discuss things that may not even be related to the scene. It creates an intimacy that is transferred into the relationship, I would say, rather than just the scene. And because it's a part of the relationship, it allows the scene to be more natural, and that intimacy builds over time. I would say that intimacy in the relationship as a whole very heavily affects how you can experience it during a scene and how you can just enjoy and explore, especially since you can do a scene the same way 3 times, and different levels of intimacy will build out just how unique or how much you can enjoy it. I mean, what are your thoughts on this, Gleeful?
I mean, yes, if you're developing intimacy in a relationship, it's not going to stay compartmentalized. If you listen to your partner, then it's going to increase rapport and increase intimacy. If you do things that make the other person happy, if you provide aftercare. A really tricky thing with hypnosis that a lot of people don't realize when they first get into it is that hypnosis can often be a fast track for intimacy. And so a lot of people who come into hypnosis with perhaps sexual or generally kinky or sensory related expectations or desires get hit with this sort of magnitude of the intimacy of even a short casual scene with another person, and they often don't know what to do with it. And this is something I've seen a lot.
Yeah, definitely. New subject gets hypnotized by someone, ends up being collared by them the next day, and then it all goes wrong because they haven't really considered what kind of connection they wanted with another person the longer term. They just felt this intimacy and they related it to the other forms of intimacy that they'd felt before, like romantic and stuff, and not realizing quite that there are different ways that we should be interpreting the same thing.
Well, okay. Well, first of all, it can totally go both ways. It's, the top is just as likely as the bottom to have this intense response to doing hypnosis with another person. It's not just like, I've opened my brain to you. It's, we are sharing this intimate thing together. But I don't think the response is saying, oh no, don't worry. The sort of intimacy that you two shared in that moment was somehow not real or less authentic just because it's newer or shorter. Is when I first met the man who's now my dom, I said, I'm only interested in keeping this casual, what can we do to sort of like limit it? And he was like, we can only do what we can do. And before I knew it, like, we were in love, and we've been together 7.5 years. And well, and it was funny, but it was also very complicated. I wasn't setting out to be in this romantic relationship, and it was something that I had to either be open to or not be with this person. And that's not going to be true across the board. It's not every person that you trance with you're going to fall in love with, but there's a saying in the hypnosis community that trance feels like falling in love. And that is because I think hypnosis is inherently intimate. I think that it lends itself to being hyper aware of another person's process, and that in and of itself is more, there's more awareness of another person than you're going to experience in like almost any day-to-day scenario.
Right, you're actually delving into someone's thought processes, how their mind works, in a lot of ways helping them to explore areas they may not have explored themselves, so learning about themselves can be very intimate as well.
Yes, but what you're describing makes it sound like the top, learning the way a bottom's mind works. It's really a two-way street. It's really, when I'm bottoming to someone in hypnosis, I am so focused on their language patterns and their responses to me, even if like my eyes are closed, I pick up on things the best I can, and it might not be conscious, and it might not be in a way that I'm going to move the scene in a certain direction based on that, like they might be doing in a more deliberate way, but it's absolutely an organic back and forth.
Right. I mean, either way, even as the subject is I'm a switch myself, and I've been hypnotized several times, I've learned that when people lead me trying to understand concepts and things that they're creating and try to connect with how they think as well, is something that I've had to learn how to do over time. And as I've connected with them, it becomes very enjoyable, but it becomes very natural at the same time. It's something of a level of comfort, and it makes me think, actually, the mention that you had with your relationship. The person I'm with currently, our first experience wasn't actually hypnosis, but it led to that was a scene that, well, it was an event we were having on a Discord server where we were doing a primal hunt where many people got to experience being hunter and prey, and I was just playing as I like to think of myself, as I said earlier, as a caretaker, so I asked as a mod to be a primal guardian, who would be someone who would give aftercare to people who needed to step out of scenes. And one of them I actually was there giving some care to help them recover, and after about an hour, she and I started talking, and we found just from the fact that she felt safe and comfortable, it created this connection just to start with. I've been with her now about 1.5 years, and I mean, it can be in so many different ways that can lead to it, but with that, it was such a personal connection that I felt like she wanted to be protected and I wanted to protect her, that it creates just an instance, or just any experience or capability can lead to something so personal. And it's not, at some points, it's not something you expect to have happen, but it's something that can be wonderful.
I think going back to the submissive's viewpoint, because when I talk, it'll be a lot about the test, because that's what I am. I haven't had successful experience as a subject yet. But from what I've heard from a lot of experienced subjects, they'll be constantly trying to work out what is expected of them from the hypnotist. Particularly if it's someone that they haven't worked with before. They'll be thinking, oh, okay, he wants me to come up now. Oh, he's taking longer to bring me up. I will go back under and go up more slowly. You know, I think that in itself is a way that subjects connect to the test. And like you said, the test is working out the best ways to... I think I said that. The best ways to make them experience what you intend. So connecting from those two standpoints is very much a mutual understanding of how to express and how to understand. And once you have that, particularly with partners that you've been with a while, it's really something special and important.
It makes me think of, I know that in hypnosis, one thing that some people may struggle with is having a more analytic mind that makes it more difficult for them to become immersed, using specific inductions or specific techniques. I mean, every person is different, so certain methods may be different across it, but a general idea I've seen and people talked with me about was that being analytical can make it more difficult at times to connect with hypnosis. Do you feel like having a more analytical mind might, or someone who's more engaged constantly with analyzing things, do you feel that might have any impact or any effects on intimacy, Gleeful?
Oh my God. So in this community, people talking about people being too analytical to be certain kind of subjects is one of my biggest pet peeves, because literally all human beings are analytical. I know that not everyone is a mathematician, but if you're an artist, then you're analytical in a different way. Every single human person has a brain that is constantly working to analyze. And when people say, oh, analytical subjects can be harder to hypnotize, people hear that and they get in their own head about it because they think of themselves as analytical, as most people do. And then it's this awful self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's sort of that whole thing. But in terms of the specific question, so first of all, when we say analytical, do we mean mathematically analytical? Do we mean trying to analyze someone's motivations? Do we mean in terms of verbal? If you say, if you're working with an accountant, you're not going to take away the number 4, but maybe you can upset their, sense of balance. Yes, you can always work towards a person's strengths. In general, in terms of intimacy, if you are stuck in your own head and worried about performing right and making the other person happy, because that should be, part of your motivation for this, yeah, it could certainly be an obstacle to actually connecting with that other person. It's about being present in the moment with another person, and if you two are working together to sort of figure out what's the best way of that, then that's intimacy. And if certain inductions aren't the best for you or whatever, then that has, that shouldn't have any real bearing on it.
Right.
So when I think of an analytical mind, I think of someone that uses a lot of critical thinking in their thought processes.
Literally everybody does that. Literally every person does that.
I think it's looking at the idea of analyzing what someone's saying and trying to pick up the meaning from it rather than simply allowing a natural understanding. In other words, if you hear a word and you try to analyze what exactly do they mean by that rather than simply hearing it and feeling what it's being said. So in other words, trying to apply additional meaning beyond simply what we hear. And while you say, yes, say an artist would, they apply critical thinking to their art, to the work that they do. such as a mathematician or an accountant would do it for their work and the actions they do, they may not analyze a person's words as heavily unless, say, they're a client or a specific situation. So anyone is possible to apply that type of reasoning. I would say for people who have more difficulty turning that off or being able to resist that, such as for myself, I grew up with ADD, and my first experience with trying to be hypnotized, I was sitting in my head and they would tell me to feel relaxed, feel calm, and I would ask, what really does it mean to be relaxed? What should I be feeling calm now? And it was not because people had told me being analytical was bad and it created a negative loop, but was rather my mind was trying to be active the entire time and trying to apply that critical thinking, and I had more difficulty turning it off. And so I've discussed with many people in the community, and you're right, we all do use critical thinking. It is a terrible thing that if people are saying, oh, because we overanalyze, that it's a general point, and people will pick up on that and begin to think, oh, I analyze, and therefore I have more difficulty. But it's more in the sense of an involuntary analysis, where it's trying to slow or calm the mind down enough to stay focused.
So then you've shared this with your partner. Let's say you're a subject in this case, and you share this with your hypnotist. And then what they should say is, oh, this is so amazing. How can we mess with that to make something cool happen? And then they, maybe they do a confusion induction where they start saying like, oh, I said relax, and you're thinking, oh, does relax mean that my body is relaxed or that my mind is relaxed? And you don't know, I'm not going to actually go in and do an induction, but that there's ways you can play with that, and those aren't seen as challenges. No one, if you say like, oh, I'm a very kinesthetic subject, no one is going to say, ooh, I'm sorry, that must make it a challenge for you. If you frame it as analytical, there's other things that are going on, and there's other things that you can play with. And maybe this is getting off the topic of intimacy, but if people are, if you're so, like, learning to get outside of your head is not an easy process. But I really, and I understand if that framing works for you, but I think that I have seen for me and for many of my friends that walking away from that framing is actually the liberating thing.
I think I'm definitely going to try and do that, because I am one of those people that would annoy you by using those words. And I think it's rubbed off on Dracoso slightly, which is why he asked that question.
It sounds like then you're saying that for people who do have a more analytic mind, such as myself, it would be good to understand what type of options and what type of choices you had. Like, for example, let's just play with it and go with a different direction.
For the second, Dracoso, what do you mean by a more analytical mind such as yourself? Because
I'm saying for a mentality that has more difficulty turning off the analytical part, rather than seeing it as a negative, rather than seeing it as, oh, this is something I can't control, so now it's a challenge or a combative situation. It's more of a focus point, whereas you can say you can use different methods or techniques that would more work along with it and build it out. So I think my original question to Gleeful was, would being over-analytical or being more analytical, could that cause an impact to intimacy?
And I don't think so. As an analytical person,
I think it means,
I used the word again.
It's okay. Gleeful, you can correct me, but from the sounds of it and the way you described it, it was, we don't want to look at it as this negative of, because you're over-analytical, that makes it more difficult. We want to look at it as, this is something that your partner needs to communicate with you and to work with you on, so that you can create that intimacy by actually connecting with them on that aspect of them.
Bring it back around to the framing of an quotation marks analytical mind being a negative within hypnosis. I think it's the framing itself that is the issue between gaining intimacy. Because if you think you're going to have trouble connecting with the other person because of the way it's been framed, you're going to have a harder time creating the intimate thing that is hypnosis. Because if all hypnosis is going to be intimate, then having it framed as it'll be harder for you to do so will make intimacy a lot harder. And so I see why Gleeful's got such a big problem with it. There's so many reasons why it's a bad way to frame things.
I mean, if we're talking about framing and intimacy, I would say, and this is once again a bit of a segue, I would say that some people have really wanted to play with hypnosis for a really long time. And so when they finally see the opportunity to do that, they forget that there's another person there. And they see them as a means to an end. And you are so getting in your own way when you do that, not only because, and this is unintentional, and I understand that when you really hunger for it and it's something you've been waiting for, you're doing it to meet your own needs. No one is going out there and saying, like, you know, it's like dating. No one is going out there and saying, I can't wait to, like, make someone else happy. You want to find someone to give you the thing. And then, you know, maybe you open your eyes and you see them for who they are. But in hypnosis, people are so caught up in the I'm going to go online and I'm going to find someone to give me a hands-free orgasm, or I'm going to find someone to own me and not really think of what that means, or I'm going to find someone I can control. And they're so caught up in the idea of it that they're not seeing whoever the partner is in front of them, virtually or in person. And if you're just going to, you can just actually get to know a person and let intimacy happen and take things slow. Like, the biggest advice I can give to someone for quicker, better intimacy is actually slowing things down. Then I think a lot of people would actually gain a lot from sort of having a different perspective.
Oh, yeah. And I completely connect with that. I mean, I've known people who I've talked with and they get into a session and they ask, okay, well, what do you want to do? And the person says, I don't know, whatever you want. And so often that's a huge red flag. And for me, I actually sit down and I'll talk with them more. I mean, I want to create something that is going to be meaningful. I want to build something out. Like, one thing I've encountered very often is I'll ask people, what are your limits? And they'll say, well, I don't want to do anything dangerous, but that's it. And I'll sit there and I'll go, okay, well, it sounds like you're still exploring then. And I'll talk with them a little bit about what other limits they might have, areas people see commonly, and it gives them a more open idea as to what they might want to do, and then just talk with them about what do they find interesting, where did they start from with this, and give them a little bit more understanding of not only how they can communicate with me, but also create a bit of intimacy by helping to show them what they might be able to do just to process and build out to find, I guess, I can't say skipping steps, but I'd say taking the steps as we talk to find what they're really interested in, what really drove them to this experience to build it out, rather than, as you say, Gleeful, just jumping into, I want to be owned, or I just want a hands-free orgasm. It's, well, why do you want that? So you can understand and connect with it, and then build it and find where you want to be and find that intimacy, rather than just, say, a simple, instant release of enjoyment.
Right, and there's nothing wrong with just wanting the hands-free orgasm, and there are amazing, you know, pro-dom hypnotists online who, or even pro-sub hypnotic subjects online who can help supply that to people. It's the same thing as, what are you looking for, and are you looking for a connection with another person? It's really as simple as that.
Yeah, I've had to slow down a lot of excited subs.
Oh yeah, I know. I've had.
I want to try everything.
I know.
Wait, what was the word? What was the word you used for that when a sub is quite new
sub
in BDSM?
frenzy is a term in BDSM, which is also should really be a two-way street, where you first get in and you just take things too fast and don't take the time to really breathe and just get to know people as peers.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had a couple of cases, or situations, I should say, where I was working with people, and even one of my friend was dealing with, where there was a very lovely young, well, not young as in under, but a very lovely boy who was interested in exploring, and she gave him a very intimate, enjoyable experience, and he wanted to have a session every day, as soon as possible, and it became from a, I'm interested, I'd like to explore this, to a, I need it now. And just seeing that, especially when, as we were saying, people can jump in and really get engaged with it and understand just how much of an intimate experience it can become. It's good, I'd say, just to also be aware of how, and I think Puppet, as you said, to be able to slow down, be able to analyze and understand why is it so important and so, and it helps them to figure out, even if that is a natural drive, let's say if that is the level of drive that they want to be at, it's good to also understand why, so that they can direct it and find healthy ways to keep that intimacy strong. Since I know for her, it was getting, the person who was exploring with him, my friend was getting a little overwhelmed with just how into it that person was. And so it's good, I'd say, in order to keep that intimacy strong, to figure out and understand more about why it's such an intimate experience for yourself.
And I think that's why it needs to be discussed before you do things, especially with people unaware of what it is like. Intimacy it's affected hypnosis in so many ways, and that's why it's always been kind of sexualized. Gleeful, I would hate to get to the end of this podcast without asking you about how intimacy has affected how hypnosis has developed over time, because you know so much about that. Where would you like to begin?
Sure. So I will sort of sum up and say that my theory for why hypnosis is sexualized, it is because it is inherently intimate. And hypnosis as we understand it today, if depending how you want to mark it, goes to about the late 18th century. So, going on 250 years. And right from the very beginning, people were nervous about hypnosis. And they weren't nervous about it, and this is before it was even called hypnosis. We're talking the animal magnetism days. And it wasn't because they were worried about someone, say, controlling another person. The idea of this thing being a force for mind control came sometime later, but it was about the closeness between two people, and it was about the vulnerability that the patient would experience, which was very evident very early on. Also, very, very many early subjects / patients were women, and at the beginning, virtually all operators or hypnotists or magnetizers were men. So it came from, this heteronormative fear of the mixing of the sexes. And essentially, over the centuries, there would be moral panic after moral panic. So a couple of the earliest examples I'll just give is Franz Mesmer is who we would call the I guess, father of hypnosis. Mesmerism is named for him. And one of his very first patients was a young woman who was blind, actually a very prominent pianist and composer. And she was a teenager, and she came to live in his house so he could tend to her full time, was the idea. And it eventually erupted in scandal, and he had to, essentially skip town. And we don't know the nature of the relationship, and we don't know if he crossed any boundaries, but this is the first story where we see that it was weird, that he had this connection with this person that intensified, that got to the point where they were living together, even though they claimed it was non-romantic and non-sexual, but it still felt icky to people. Similarly, some years later, the Louis XVI commissioned Benjamin Franklin and a bunch of other notable scientists of the day to investigate magnetism and figure out if it was real or not. And that's a whole other story, and it's amazing. But there's one excerpt of their paper where they essentially say, this is weird and kind of hot. And they describe, these vulnerable women who are going through these convulsions, and that might be at the sway of this person who is making them feel this way. And there's a sort of recognition that, the hypnotic subject feels good, and they associate that with this person who is in this power, this role of authority, and that made people uncomfortable, and arguably for good reason. And which isn't to say that hypnosis isn't used, non-sexually for medical valuable reasons all the time, but you're really playing with fire. The potential, I think, is really inherently there, and something that non-fetishists have seen since the beginning and predating all of the tropes. And I think the reason that we fetishize the tropes is because they all tie in to this sort of fundamental thing that is, I think, fundamentally predicated on there's a degree of power exchange, and I do think that there's just intimacy full stop, or certainly the potential for it. Anyway, in a nutshell, that's my shortest version of that spiel.
And as I said before, the full class is utterly amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I definitely get off on the control aspect and the power exchange that comes from that through hypnosis.
Oh yeah, I mean, it comes in so many forms. I know over just history, like you were saying, Gleeful, that it came from just such a different mindset than what we have today, and it's grown and developed into, and I mean, it's still around in some of the original formats that exist, I believe, and that its application just based on culture, based on group, just even based on individual can be so unique that just knowing a bit more about the roots and exploring that can give so much more depth and so much more meaning as to how hypnosis can truly be applied.
Sorry, could you say again that hypnosis is practiced in a myriad of ways?
Yes, that in a way there's a variety of ways, and so I know for a lot of my friends, I've actually told people before that, and I've been aware for a while that hypnosis was used in surgery, and I've told people, and
Still is.
oh yeah, and so that's why people are still surprised to hear that, because a lot of people's experience is usually just either having seen it in a cartoon or a movie or, you know, a stage show, as they do in many high school graduations. It seems is one of the most common, or on stage shows. And so just knowing more about how it can be applied, it gives this different perspective to look at it, and it makes, I think, more understanding from that sense of intimacy for how it can be so personalized just from how people have applied it in the past. And I'm actually very curious, with that wide variety, what, to you, Gleeful, would you think, or do you think is either the most unique or the most obscure application of hypnosis that you've heard of?
The most obscure application of hypnosis?
I guess the least likely thing that someone would imagine hypnosis might be used for, that people have applied to it as a practical application.
I mean, medically, people have tried to use hypnosis and autosuggestion for very physical health things. I mean, there's no evidence that hypnosis can be used to cure cancer, certainly. But there is evidence that hypnosis can have a lot of very physical effects based on the mind-body connection that could legitimately be medically applied. I mean, some of the things that I think are perhaps a little bit stranger are past life regression, even though that one's pretty popular. I will say during the 19th century, they were very sure that a hypnotized subject, a really good subject, had essentially ESP, that they had clairvoyance, that they could see into the future, that they could do essentially magic tricks. Like they would take them on the road and they would hypnotize them, and then they'd blindfold them and be like, "What card am I holding up?" And they'd be like, "The Ace of Diamonds," and everyone would be like, "Wow, it's because they're hypnotized." So that was a very strong key tenet of hypnosis for years and years.
It's an interesting crossover. The idea
I should have started there, because that is one that is both kind of bonkers and has also faded from the public consciousness.
The idea that hypnosis brings out psychic potential. That's
the really big one, though, the medical application was that they could a good somnambulist, as they called it, could diagnose medical problems in themselves and even other people. You're sick and you go to the hospital and you don't feel well and you can describe your symptoms, but you're like, I don't know, my stomach hurts, and then you hypnotize them and they say, "Oh no, actually I can tell now, it's like there's it's something in my liver," like that, because they were hypnotized. And you'd be like, "Okay, what about that person over there?" And they'd be like, "Oh, it's his kidneys." This was something that people did for a while.
a good example, I think, of the way that the mind can affect the body. Well, it's a bit of a negative thing, but if you bring up something that someone is allergic to, then they can actually start getting a rash as if they'd been near that thing, because their body is set up to react to it and they know what should happen. So the mind goes, okay, let's have this happen. And it's really strange.
Yeah, I think it's a neurochemical reaction that feeds into the nervous system, and then that tries to react to it in a way. I guess it could be almost an enhanced version of phantom limb syndrome, but instead focused on a sensation that it's responding to, an allergy that you would have. I mean, I'd love to see studies if that's possible. If so, I wonder if hypnosis would be able to help, if done in the right situations, to be helped to reduce allergic reactions.
Have
so that
you never been warned as a hypnotist to be careful of allergies? I have never heard of a subject who actually had an allergic reaction in trance, though I'm sure it's possible. But one of the first safeties that I hear taught often is ask your subjects if they have allergies, because then if you tell them to imagine they're relaxed in a meadow, they'll like see a bee and they'll like freak out. Like it's
right.
I think it's maybe overemphasized as a safety, but absolutely this is a thing used with hypnosis.
Oh yeah, it's the same reason why I ask what are their phobias, so I can understand as well what are areas that we want to avoid. And especially with phobias, one thing I've learned is if you focus on the opposite to some degree, such as I have a fear of drowning, so if I imagine myself on a firm land or on some type of firm space where I feel comfortable, it actually helps me to relax even more. So knowing a lot about it, especially as you brought up with allergies, that knowing what they may be allergic to is a key thing, so that you avoid negative reactions, but also avoid any type of, I think, as Pub was mentioning, causing a rash or any type of neurological response.
I mean, listen, if you want to ask your partner if they have any allergies, more information is good information. Once again, this is an example I see brought up that I don't like. You can't literally account for everything. So, but I will say, okay, in terms of the mind-body connection and intimacy, you could use hypnosis to evoke, certain aspects of physicality that you might not have access to if you're, for example, playing online. And right now, so we're recording this during the pandemic, and I have not been able to touch my owner in a month and a half, which is a record for us. And so we've had to do online dates, which was not up to this point our default. So when we're in trance and we're thinking this is different than how we usually do it, we can use trance to talk about how I know what his touch feels like and I know what his smell is like, and to make those elements still somewhat present. So hypnosis for us is not only just how intimacy works for us full stop. Practically speaking, it's also a tool for maintaining it.
Right. And I know even with my partner, with many people that I explore with, I love to build out imposition, the focus that you can build how you experience or how much you can feel what someone describes or what someone says they're doing in real life, and to enjoy it. And that's a key aspect that I have with my partner, that we like to share experiences, everything from snuggles to hugs to just playing, and imposition is a very big part of intimacy for me in many of my relationships, to be able to give them that sensation even though we may be long distance.
Even when you're not on a webcam, you can still make them feel like they're being watched intently by you, and just that small thing can change a scene for the better. There's so many ways that you can add to a scene, especially around now.
Oh yeah.
Where you might not be able to meet up with a partner. This opens up so much and allows you to be intimate in ways that you wouldn't be able to be otherwise. In fact, I didn't do long distance relationships until I learnt hypnosis. And that's because I needed a sense of intimacy and connection to be able to really enjoy a relationship. And so it's because of hypnosis that I've been able to have the relationships that I have with people over a longer distance. It's a really lovely thing.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started exploring hypnosis, other than when I was in school and I was much younger, I remember trying to do a lot of it over text, and I felt like over time I was able to actually feel that intimacy grow. But yeah, doing it over voice, building it out, and focusing so much more on what the person can feel and just what they have imagined. I think that's a big thing that I've learned, especially when it comes down to how intimate it is just trying to get an understanding of how their mind has shaped what hypnosis looks like or feels like, and trying to connect with that on a very deep level has made such a difference. Because I know we all come into hypnosis with some kind of a view or idea of what it might look like or feel like, even if it's a very vague idea. But yeah, putting in that effort to connect to that, honestly, especially when it's in a situation where you can't be face to face, it makes all the difference, in my opinion. Thank you very much, Gleeful, for coming and being a part of this.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's topic.
If you've enjoyed this, you can support us at patreon.com/braincage. You can also join us over on Discord at Fetlandia and talk with us directly.
Links for both are listed in the description.
Thanks again for listening, and take care.